There's a war out there. It's a war for your data. You have hackers that just want to peek into places that they're not allowed. You have crackers that want to get inside for personal gain. And then you have hacktivists that want to get inside to make a political statement. Whatever the source, the outcome is all the same. Someone wants to see your data. All the security in the world means butt kiss if you have not trained your people to resist social engineering. Have your techs failing to patch hardware and software, or leave an open invitation to your site by not shredding items in your trash.
Penetration testing is different in that it's still part of risk management, but it shows the impact and the capability of a determined attacker to exploit particular vulnerabilities in your infrastructure. And a lot of the current attack vectors are client-side attacks. So, hey, please update your LinkedIn your LinkedIn profile, and click on this link. Go update it, and then they click on the link, and then they get popped. And from there, that's not even necessarily penetration testing. That could be part of it. But then from there, what is the impact of that access of that unauthorized person? So can they escalate privileges? What data can they obtain off the local machine? And then slowly escalating privileges, can they obtain domain admin credentials? And then can they obtain access to your VM infrastructure or databases? Okay. Again, it's different than vulnerability testing or vulnerability scanning. Vulnerability scanning gives you a good idea of what your vulnerabilities are, but not necessarily the capabilities with the tools that are out there to do damage to your organization, whether it's from a denial of service, whether it's from exfiltrating data from your organization, whether it's from stealing intellectual property, things like that. Way back in the 2000s, it was a little harder, but these days, I'd be very surprised if someone said that, no, you can't legally learn that, because there's Metasploitable, which is a very vulnerable Linux distribution that you can download. There's Damn Vulnerable Web App. There's Hack Me Bank. There's Matilla Die, which are all web applications that you can test against. And again, it's ASP, it's PHP, it's MySQL, it's MS SQL. So you can test all your skills against that. Obviously, just installing a base Windows XP or Windows 2003 machine and installing everything. In fact, I've created one, I call it Winsploitable, with a whole bunch of vulnerable software on it and installs, and so you can easily learn those type of skills. Backtrack, and Backtrack isn't necessarily a tool, it's a Linux distribution with a whole bunch of open source software on it that's freely available, and that kind of breaks it down, the tools that are available, into commercial or open source type of software. So on the commercial side, when it comes to penetration testing tools, you have Core Impact and Canvas. Core Impact usually ranges anywhere from $25,000 to $35,000 for one license.
Wow.
Very expensive. Whereas Metasploit on the open source is free, and then they have some, that's put out by Rapid7, and then they have some commercial versions of Metasploit that make testing a lot easier, and those range anywhere from $3,000 to $15,000. All depends. It all depends on the scope, and the scoping is probably the most important aspect. If it's just a social engineering aspect where you need to prove that you can obtain remote shell or remote access to someone's system, that takes a couple hours, if that. But if you're wanting to escalate, again, it all depends on the scope. So if the end criteria is domain admin access to a customer database or VM infrastructure or something like that, then it might take a little bit longer.
Okay.
But the ISSA, so Information Systems Security Association, I'm actually the president of our local chapter here. We have an international board that helps with that. So there's that. From a penetration testing standpoint, there's not a lot of, I guess, organizations that specifically for that. They're more around certifications and websites, and maybe, but they're not as a structured organization just for penetration testing. professionals per se. It would be more with your ISSA and organizations like that. A little bit with ISACA also, but that's more on the audit side. But say it's necessarily in penetration testing itself. Some people believe in it, some people don't, but I think that's probably based a lot on the scoping that was done and the proficiency of the penetration tester. Because some of the penetration testers, just like anyone else in the IT field, some of them are very, very good, and some of them are mediocre at best. Like one of the big ones that I harp on with penetration testing firms right now is that some of them can't even get by antivirus. That's like, really? You guys are horrible. I mean, to me, that's something that most penetration testers should assume is on everyone's desktop, even if it's out of date or whatever. But antivirus, and I'm finding there's few penetration testing firms that are able to get past it, and then just being able to scope it correctly for the customer.
The first step in securing our data is finding out how our data is insecure. That is where penetration testing comes in. The Information Systems Security Association, or the ISSA, defines penetration testing as the simulation of an attack against a target network or application encompassing a wide range of activities and variations. Penetration testing is used to find security lapses, whether it is in your infrastructure, application, or personnel. We use penetration testing to find weaknesses in our defenses so they can be closed and make it harder for the bad guy to get in. Once a bad guy gets in, many companies spend millions of dollars to getting them out, closing those holes, and completing damage control. In general, there are 4 steps of penetration testing, plus the debrief at the end. Whether you are protecting an application, yourself, or your company, you start at the same place, intelligence gathering. This is where tools like Google, Bing, and other internet organizations are critical. Using Google, you can find a treasure trove of information for a target, names of executives, IT personnel, and others. What is your username where you work? Something using your first and last name? Just a little bit of information can be used to great effect to a hacker or social engineer. What about finding source code that was inadvertently released or shared and then got spidered? This information can be used to find holes and bugs in your software to exploit. Step 2 involves scanning for ports or physical reconnaissance of the target location. We would be using tools like Ping, Nmap, and even the venerable dumpster dive to gather further information and refine our knowledge of the target. The next step is your planning and execution phase. You take the information you have gathered and develop a plan of attack. Metasploit and Jack the Ripper see heavy use in this phase. When most people think of a person hacking, this is the step that they're thinking about. While it is probably the most entertaining of the process, this process is entirely dependent on the quality of intelligence and recon completed for the target. On computer systems, the last step involves maintaining access. This includes adding backdoors to systems, as well as creating administrator accounts that can be used at a later time. Getting access is really only half of the hack. With penetration testing, we use the same tools and methodologies that our attackers may use. Finally, we will need to debrief. Whether this is your group, your executives, or another organization, it doesn't matter. This is the point where your testing and exploitation can be turned into actionable items. There are several tools that penetration testers can use. Some cost large sums of money, while other great tools are open source and free to use. For the new penetration tester, you can download a Linux distribution called Backtrack. Backtrack has a very large number of applications used to exploit and penetrate targets. From using the much overlooked Ping utility to Nmap for port scanning and Metasploit framework that is frequently updated with the latest exploits. There are even tools for ripping passwords and comparing password hashes. There are far too many tools to list them all. These are but a few of the more useful tools in a penetration tester's arsenal. Another useful methodology for finding a site to hack is what is called war driving. PC Magazine defines war driving as driving around an area with a laptop computer and an 802.11 wireless LAN adapter in order to find unsecured wireless LANs. Using tools found in Backtrack Linux, all you need is a wireless sniffer, a computer GPS, and your computer, and you can begin mapping your target, looking for weak or non-existent encryption or even rogue access points that an employee may have installed. As part of this project, we tested war driving and looked around a neighborhood. Spending 23 minutes in a neighborhood, we were able to log over 1,470 wireless access points. A bit over 5% had no security, and just under 10% had web encryption, which can be bypassed in minutes. Wireless access points that did not broadcast their SSIDs were also logged. That is a very poor security measure to keep people out. It is the digital equivalent of closing your front door. Software testing is a major part of penetration testing as well. SQL injection attacks, or SQLIAs, are considered one of the top web application vulnerabilities in both 2007 and 2010, according to the Open Web Application Security Project. SQLIAs are part of a spectrum of attacks that insert some sort of information into a SQL statement. Using these attacks, an attacker can run commands on the local SQL machine. This can do anything from make a page fail to load up to granting access to a newly created user depending on how big of a hole is opened up. SQLIAs are defeated using good coding practices that have developed to defeat these attacks, like pattern checks, parameterized statements, and other established methods. Social engineering, or client-side attacks, have become one of the hacker's best tools. Kevin Poulsen, Kevin Mitnick, and Steve Stasikonis have proven for years that social engineering works. Social engineering is the clever manipulation of the natural human tendency to trust. Social engineering attacks include phishing and spear phishing, which is a targeted phishing attack using data from previous recon steps, and even dropping thumb drives near an entrance that is often used to drop a backdoor onto a system it is inserted into. The use of social engineering attacks are especially a concern because of our tendencies as people to trust others. A simple intrusion can be done by someone bringing in a power strip with a small processor built in, an SD card that plugs into a network and records traffic being transmitted over the network, especially with the use of a properly designed payload that overloads a switch's routing table. A simple USB wireless adapter can be set up to be plugged into the back of a computer and give someone wireless access through that terminal. There are several ways to learn skills used for penetration testing. Certified Information Systems Security Professional, CISSP, and Certified Ethical Hacker are two of the more prominent certifications used by penetration testers. There are boot camps and courses that will help you get these certifications. If you are more self-motivated, there are several good books on the topic that will take you from introductory to expert level in these skills. All you have to do is set up a Backtrack Linux and a couple of virtual machines that are unpatched and running Windows XP, and you have a fully configurable test lab to learn the skills needed. Protecting yourself. While things may seem a bit bleak, there are several ways to protect yourself. First and foremost, keep all of your servers up to date with patches. This includes your infrastructure hosts as well, like DHCP and DNS servers. Using a cell phone, you can quickly do a wireless survey of your location and find out what Wi-Fi signals are being transmitted outside of your site. A quick walk around the perimeter with your cell phone will let you know if a rogue access point has been added. Better password security can also help. Switching over to a two-factor authentication is a very powerful method to prevent unauthorized access to your network. Set up protocols to use if someone calls and asks for information. Passcodes help. Question why anyone wants information and doesn't have it themselves. Another way to look at it is this. Would you give this information freely to your worst enemy? That advice comes from Kevin Mitnick. Shred everything. Also, think about locking and securing any external trash bins. A business card of a contact, a contract, notes, almost anything can give nuggets of information that can be used to infiltrate your organization. Penetration testing is a valuable tool for security professionals. It lets you probe your infrastructure and helps you find weak points that are exploitable. It can be a little fun as well, thinking like a bad guy. Regular testing is required to keep track of the ever-changing face of IT. Test every server you bring up, and then schedule regular tests to make sure your protocols are effective over time. It is also a good practice to bring in fresh eyes that can look at your infrastructure from time to time and also attempt penetration tests. Remember that a penetration test is just as good as the information gathered about the target. Your infrastructure is only as strong as your weakest link.
And I don't think people do enough penetration testing. I would say, sadly, I would say probably less than 10% of the valley here does it.